Well, how do you break out of that? Because I have many friends who are like you, who are very academic and have this very narrow life experience. I mean,
Well,
how do you break out of that and
yeah.
and broaden your
That's a
life
great
orientation?
question because, and I think that in many respects, I think it's a matter of becoming self-conscious first. And that's why we even set it up in this lesson this way, that there's this academic orientation and life orientation, just to sort of raise the issue that people do this. And well-known and gifted theologians go in both directions. And what that does then is it sort of calls each individual to say, well, what's my natural propensity? Honestly, most people that are watching third millennium videos like this one are probably more toward the academic, at least at this stage in their lives. They may not be their whole lives, but at this moment they are. And so it's a call to them to reassess that and to say, am I overemphasizing the academic side of theology? And you do that simply by becoming aware of who you are. And then in some respects, working against what your natural propensities are. I know sometimes we tell people a lot, find your passion and then do it for God. Find your gifts and do it for God. And all that's true and that's good. Nothing wrong with that. But there's a sense in which we also have to discover our weaknesses and strengthen ourselves. When people do weightlifting, they don't just strengthen the strong muscles they have. They work very hard to get the weak muscles up to par. And that's kind of the way it is in theology too. So if a person tends to be very practical in their orientation, I don't have time for those theological books. I don't have time for systematic theology. I don't have time for reading those highfalutin books, all those big words in it, because I love Jesus too much to be involved in that. Well, they need to understand loving Jesus, at least to their students, involves getting into that kind of thing because it's a rich heritage of academic theology. But if your natural propensity is the other way, then you got to push yourself. You have to push yourself to do the other things. And that means doing things that are hard and risky, and that might be even psychologically challenging to a person that's academic in his or her orientation, like exposing yourself to real pain and suffering in the world, like working with poor people, like traveling to other countries and becoming involved in short-term missions to force yourself into risky and difficult environments so that you can begin to see the need for theology to be life-giving and not just intellectually satisfying. I mean, have you known people that just look at theology as intellectually satisfying? And that's it?
When I look in the mirror every day.
Oops. I wouldn't have asked you that question if I thought that. But yeah, I think that's a serious issue. And so if that really is who you are, then it's very important as you prepare for Christian leadership not to allow that propensity to continue. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's my orientation too. The last thing I want to do is be uncomfortable, but that's the first thing I need to do. And I can't tell you how, when I finished school and I began to do mission trips a lot and go to different parts of the world and see real seriously difficult places like in communist countries and things like that in the old days when communists were still communists and Christians were still Christians in those parts of the world. I found that extremely challenging, but I also found it extremely life-giving, and it changed the way I looked at all of theology. The academic didn't become less important to me, but the life application, the practical orientation, the life orientation became much more important to me. And it did have that kind of feedback effect as we were talking about, that it began to challenge what I was emphasizing. We all have our favorite drums to beat, right? Mm-hmm. And branches of the church have their favorite drums to beat. And usually those drums that we constantly beat just sort of fit nicely with our corporate personality, because birds of a feather flock together. And so you tend to have people of the same kind of personality gathering in churches, and so you get this sort of corporate mentality, and it's really a monster by that time when everybody you're around is just like you in their personality and their orientations. And so then it becomes, as it were, codified and authorized by your community, your local church, let's say, or your denomination. That's when it gets very serious, and when we have to, as Christian leaders, break out of that and not be people who completely comply with the norm of our community, because that usually does little more than just confirm us in our own myopic views of the world.